Okay, I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School going over ideology and party. What you're going to need today is this survey. It's a double-sided page. The handout is on the website. And so yeah, this is what we're talking about. Your ideology and your party are not the same thing, but there's a correlation between ideology and party, which confuses the matter. So when we say ideology, that's your coherent set of beliefs. So that means that it's a consistent set of beliefs that doesn't contradict itself. And it's what you believe, you can't necessarily compromise on it. Whereas the party is the organization that wants to win elections in order to deliver policy. So the people who join a party tend to have common beliefs. But the party itself is not necessarily required to stick steadfastly to an ideology, because it needs to stick to what the people want so that it can get votes, so that it can control the government and deliver those policies. The reason they get so easily confused is currently, 2016, the two parties do seem to have a deep connection with two different ideologies. So the Democratic Party tends to take on a liberal ideology, and the Republican Party tends to take on a conservative ideology. But the party can shift. The party can compromise on things and change over time, whereas your ideology is essentially unwavering. Your personal ideology can shift over time, but it tends to do that very slowly. So what you're doing now is you are going to do this survey. Okay? So a couple tips before you start. Stick to the 100, 75, 50, 25, 0 scale. It just makes it easier. As you answer these questions, or you're not actually answering them, you're reading the statement and you're either strongly agreeing, strongly disagreeing. Try to keep the 50s to a minimum. You probably aren't truly in the middle on anything, but use the 50 when you really don't understand something. And these are short, very loaded statements. So you might have more questions for each one. I can't give you much more detail than this because it is... So yes, you might want an elaboration on each statement, which can't be given because more elaboration will insert bias on it. So do your best to do this. Pause the video while you do it. Pause it now. Okay. Now that you've answered all of these, what you're going to do is you're going to add up your scores. The directions are on the back. You take all the odds, those are the unshaded ones, add them up, divide it by 9. Do the same thing for the evens, add it up, divide it by 9. You have your x and y, so you can plot your point. So your x-axis is this horizontal axis, y-axis is the vertical. Plot your point. Okay, so let's actually talk about this chart. Most people fall somewhere in the middle, not generally on the outside borders. But all the odd questions ask about how you balance freedom and order. And freedom and order are mutually exclusive. The more freedom you have means you don't have many laws on the books, the less order you're going to have. But if you want more order, you're going to have more laws and less freedom. So the two, they can't be both had at once perfectly. So those questions were asking how you personally feel the government ought to balance those mutually exclusive things. And this is a question for all governments, but it's particular to our post-American Revolution. How, after throwing off British rule, would we set up a new government that would promote these two wonderful things? Now add into the mix a more recent concern for what government ought to do, which is promote equality, and we call that the modern dilemma. That's not to say the original dilemma is gone. We still see it every day. You tend to hear about this dilemma presented in the media as liberty versus security. But the modern dilemma is really a post-Civil War question. So after the Civil War, in setting up a new egalitarian society post-slavery, how would the government promote both freedom and equality, also mutually exclusive? So where you found yourself on this was how you balance these three things. And most people agree that all three are really good. But knowing you can't have both freedom and order and freedom and equality equally, we disagree on how to achieve the right mix. Okay, most Americans fall in the middle. On this next chart, I'm going to put everything we went over. So copy it, pause it while you copy it, and then I'll be talking about it. Okay, So now that you have that copied, I want to point out, libertarians value freedom and sprinkle some more freedom on it. Okay, it doesn't mean unless they're at the origin. Libertarians do want some order, some equality, but pretty much that comes below freedom. And the nice thing about having as much freedom as possible is you don't have the government doing all that much. By limiting government, you're going to have low taxes. Now, on the opposite side of that, over here, it's just the opposite. Equality and order are more important for the government to promote than freedom. So here, your government is going to need a lot of tax dollars to promote both order and equality. So you're going to have higher taxes in this top quadrant. Now, most Americans actually fall on this spectrum, and it's a left-right spectrum. Liberal on the left, conservative on the right, moderate in the middle. Most Americans fall here in the middle. Most Austinites fall here in the liberal area, and most Texans fall in the conservative. But I want to really underscore here that Americans are generally in the middle. Liberals tend to focus more on promoting equality and freedom above order. So that being said, they're going to emphasize programs that promote social welfare and civil rights, both to create a more egalitarian society. They would call themselves progressive. They tend to be pro-choice, for marriage equality, against the death penalty. And over here, conservatives, wanting to keep government small but still have order, tend to focus on protection and punishment. So by protection, I mean securing the borders. Having a strong military force, a strong police force, protection and punishment in order to preserve order. While liberals would call themselves more progressive, conservatives would say that they're more traditional or more religious, so they tend to be pro-life, against gay marriage. Now, any of these topics for the parties can shift around, but generally these ideologies believe these things. So the Democratic Party, they fall left of center. So this is the center, and the liberal quadrant is the left side. So you could write in here the Democratic Party is kind of like a snow cone out from this triangle. And the Republican Party does the same thing over here. So the Republican Party tends to be conservative, liberal, Democratic Party tends to be liberal. But they're both close to the center because they need to get votes in order to win elections. Now, I don't put any details for the middle here, but liberals and conservatives agree on a whole lot. We know fundamentally they agree on the importance of freedom. And if I were to compare the Democratic and Republican parties, they actually agree on a lot more than they disagree on. It's just that in politics, we wouldn't focus on what we agree on. It's the differences that are in discussion. Okay, so we have two parties. And as I just showed you, the Democratic Party tends to be more liberal, the Republican Party tends to be conservative, and that is currently, that can change because the parties can change. But what causes a two-party system? We're a really diverse country. We have lots of races, ethnicities, religions, languages, backgrounds, socioeconomic groups, industries. So what makes us have just two parties? Now, I acknowledge there's other parties, the Green Party, the Socialist Party, Libertarian Party, but two parties win, okay? The Democrat and Republican parties, they're the ones that win elections. So why just two? And to really make it a profound question, let's look to Italy. It has 10 parties, 10 political parties. But Italy is not that diverse. People there are predominantly white, Catholic, Italian-speaking, group of people with Italian heritage very often. Very unified, not unified necessarily, but very homogenous, and they end up with many more parties than our country, which is much more diverse and ends up with just two. So one explanation is tradition. It's one you'll find in every single textbook. We started with two parties, the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, and that's sort of continued. An elaboration of the tradition explanation is the simplicity explanation. I don't really like either. The simplicity explanation, the idea that people like to have two choices, they like to think of the world as good and bad, black and white, night and day. Why I don't like that argument is it still doesn't explain what's going on in countries like Italy, where there are more parties. So a better explanation is our electoral system. And this, you've seen this term, single-member district. That's how we elect representatives to the House. What we haven't gone over is plurality. So add in plurality. Plurality means most votes wins. Now, a majority is when you get over half the votes. So if you win a majority, that means over half the people voted for you, you win the election. But in our system, it's a plurality that wins. Whoever has the most votes wins. It doesn't necessarily need to be a majority. So it's kind of the square and the rectangle. A square is a rectangle isn't a square. So often you can win both a majority and a plurality. But there are times you might win a plurality without a majority. You can win the most votes without winning a majority. That often happens when there's more than two parties. When there's multiple candidates and someone wins, but they didn't necessarily win over half. Another name for plurality is winner take all or first past the post. So pause this and go watch this link that I have. Okay, so you have seen now, after watching CGP Gray's video, about our two-party system. Now we inevitably end up with two parties because the smaller parties keep dropping out to throw allegiance to the likely parties. And CGP Gray is pretty negative on the two-party system. And there are some big drawbacks to the two-party system, but I want to make sure we understand that there are some good points to the two-party system. So one that I think it matters to me as an American is that with having two parties, it forces compromise. CGP Gray takes the view that the two parties leave out small groups. And yes, I would agree, our two parties do sometimes leave out small groups. But neither party can afford to leave out too many people because it needs those votes to win. So the Democratic and Republican parties do their best to appeal to a wide range of people, and they bring compromise and unity within their party. So instead of us dividing along all the lines that we could divide along, we could divide along religious lines. There could be a Catholic party, a Baptist party, a Jewish party, a Muslim party, or we could divide along racial lines, a black party, a white party, an Asian party, a Hispanic party. We could divide on so many lines in our society, but we don't. We have a variety of people coming together within one party that have to essentially care about each other's interests too in order to win an election. And I think CGP Gray doesn't do well at really acknowledging that very positive side of a two-party system. Another positive side of a two-party system is the winner does secure a majority, meaning that when you only have two people, the winner generally got over 50%, and that gives the winner a mandate to govern. Whereas if you are winning with only 20% of the vote, then you don't necessarily have the true support of the country. So the winner securing a majority also helps to give legitimacy to the government. Now this, I would say, is a negative effect. The parties do become centrist. So the Democratic Party is on the left side of the spectrum, and the Republican Party is on the right side of the spectrum. So they're different, but since the majority of Americans, and they need a majority to win the election, are in the middle, the two parties have to come very close to the center. They don't go straight to the center. They have to distinguish themselves so you have a reason to go vote. So you can go, I am a Democrat, or I am a Republican, and give support. But they are actually quite close. If I had a list of beliefs from the Democratic Party and a list from beliefs from the Republican Party, and then a list of beliefs that both parties agree on, that middle list would actually be longer. And that is maybe a negative effect because it means that we don't necessarily feel like there are options, which can bring us to the final effect, which is definitely a negative one, that people might feel as though the parties are too similar or leave out too many groups' interests, and so they start to feel a lack of political efficacy, like their vote doesn't matter. Okay, so this is what we covered: the causes of a two-party system, the effects of a two-party system, ideology, and party and the differences. Okay, that is it.